The baby's cry cut through the late-night bus station like a thin blade. It echoed off concrete pillars, rattled the metal benches, and slipped under the skin of everyone who pretended not to hear it. Most people did pretend. They kept their eyes glued to their phones, their shoulders hunched, their worlds narrowed to the size of a screen. On the far end of the station, beneath a flickering fluorescent light, Maya swayed on her feet. Her arms ached, her back burned, and the edges of her vision pulsed in and out like a failing signal. She tightened her hold on the bundle pressed to her chest, the only warmth she had left. The baby whimpered again, weak and tired now, as if even crying took effort. "I know," she murmured, her voice barely sound. "I know, sweetheart, just a little longer." But she didn't know how much longer, a little, could be. She hadn't eaten since the day before. The last of her money had gone to bus fare that morning, an attempt to reach the aunt who had promised help and then stopped answering calls. The formula she'd rationed so carefully was gone. Her body, starved and exhausted, had begun to betray her in small ways. Trembling fingers, dizzy spells, a roaring in her ears she could no longer ignore. Now that roaring grew louder. The station spun. Maya tried to sit, but her knees buckled before she reached the bench. The world tilted sharply to the left. For one terrifying second, the baby slipped in her arms. Panic surged, giving her just enough strength to clutch the tiny body against her chest. Then the light went out. She collapsed sideways onto the cold concrete, still curled protectively around her child. The baby's cry rose into a thin, desperate wail. For a moment, no one moved. Then a man in a worn gray coat stood up. He hadn't planned to be there. He was supposed to be 2 towns over by now, on a late bus to a place he wasn't sure he wanted to return to. Life had stalled him lately. Appointments missed, calls ignored, a heaviness in his chest he couldn't quite name. He'd come to the station early to avoid the crowd, to think. Instead, the sound of that cry tore him out of his thoughts like a rope around his ribs. People stared, some stood, none stepped forward, except him. He crossed the floor in long, urgent strides, knelt beside the fallen woman, and gently shifted the baby upright against his own shoulder. The child quieted a little, as if sensing stability. "Ma'am," he said, touching her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Her skin was cool, too cool. He looked up. "Someone call an ambulance." A few startled faces blinked at him. Then a woman fumbled for her phone. Another approached with a bottle of water. The man removed his coat and spread it beneath Maya's head, cradling it with one steady hand while rocking the baby with the other. The child rooted weakly against the fabric of his sweater. "Hungry," he murmured. "You're hungry." The ambulance arrived quickly after that, lights painting the walls red and blue. Paramedics moved in with practiced efficiency, lifting Maya onto a stretcher while the man hovered helplessly to the side. "She's severely dehydrated," one of them said. "Likely malnutrition too." "And the baby?" he asked. "Undernourished, but stable. They both need medical care. Can I come with them?" The paramedic hesitated. "Are you family?" The man looked down at the baby, whose tiny fingers had curled around his sweater without his noticing. "I can be," he said quietly. The paramedic held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "Get in. Dash dash dash." Maya woke to the steady beep of a heart monitor and the smell of disinfectant. For several seconds, she didn't know where she was. Panic surged through her chest. Then she remembered the baby. She tried to sit up. A gentle hand pressed her shoulder. "Easy. You're safe." She turned her head and saw him sitting beside her bed, coat folded neatly over the back of the chair. He looked tired, lines at the corners of his eyes, stubble on his jaw, but his posture was alert, as if he'd been guarding that space for hours. Her breath stuttered. "My baby. She's okay," he said quickly. "They're giving her formula right now. She was hungry, but she's strong." Tears flooded Maya's eyes without warning. She raised a hand to cover her face, shame and relief crashing together in a messy wave. "I failed her," she whispered. "You didn't," he replied. "You collapsed because you were trying too hard." The doctor arrived soon after. Maya was treated for dehydration and exhaustion. The baby, Lena, was small but stable. The nurse brought her into the room wrapped in a soft hospital blanket, her mouth already searching for the bottle. Maya took her into her arms with shaking hands. "I'm Daniel," the man said after a while. "I found you at the station." "Thank you," she whispered, the words too small for what they carried. He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." But she felt like she owed him everything. Over the next few days, Daniel visited daily. At first, he told himself it was just to check in, to make sure they were okay. But the truth ran deeper. Every time he left that hospital, something pulled him back the next morning. He learned pieces of Maya's story in fragments, how she'd left an abusive home, how the baby's father had disappeared the moment he learned about the pregnancy, how shelters had been full, jobs impossible to keep with an infant in her arms. Daniel didn't offer solutions. He listened. Sometimes that felt like the bravest thing he could do. On the fourth day, a social worker came to discuss options: temporary housing, assistance programs, job placement. Maya nodded politely, but the fear in her eyes never left. After the woman left, Maya stared at the wall. "They'll take her," she whispered. "If I can't prove I can support her, they'll take her." "They won't," Daniel said, though he wasn't sure. "You're trying. That matters." She looked at him then, really looked. "Why are you helping us?" The question hung between them, heavy. Daniel hesitated. He could give an easy answer. He could say it was simple kindness, or coincidence. But the truth pressed harder. "My wife and I lost our son 7 years ago," he said quietly. "We divorced soon after. I thought I'd learned how to live without hope. Then I heard a baby crying in a bus station." Maya's hand went to her chest. "I don't know why your story crossed mine," he continued. "But I know that walking away from you both would feel like losing another chance." Silence stretched, thick with the weight of shared grief. When Maya finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I don't want to be alone anymore." He nodded. "You're not. Daniel had a small house on the edge of town. It had been too quiet for too long. Dust on the shelves, unopened mail on the table, one place set instead of 3. When he asked the social worker about temporary placement, her eyebrows lifted. "You're offering your home. For now," he said. "Until she gets back on her feet." It took hours of paperwork, interviews, and background checks. Maya trembled through every minute of it, terrified that one wrong word would rip Lena from her arms. Daniel stayed beside her the entire time. 2 days later, they were discharged together. Maya stood in Daniel's living room, baby in arms, staring at the soft couch, the clean floors, the little crib he'd assembled overnight with the help of a neighbor. "You don't have to do all this," she said again. "I know," he answered gently. "I want to." That night, Maya slept in a real bed for the first time in months. Lena slept in the crib beside her, full and warm. Daniel lay awake down the hall, listening to the quiet and letting it settle into his bones. He hadn't realized how lonely he'd been until loneliness left. The weeks passed in a careful rhythm. Maya recovered slowly. Daniel drove her to job interviews. The first few didn't pan out. Then a small diner offered part-time morning shifts. The pay wasn't much, but it was a start. Daniel watched Lena while Maya worked. The baby grew stronger, louder, more curious. She smiled at everything, including Daniel's reflection in the mirror. The first time she laughed at him, a sound like tiny bells, something inside him cracked open. "You're in trouble," Maya teased softly. "I already know," he said, and meant it. At night, they ate simple meals together. Maya learned to cook again. Daniel learned that the sound of dishes clinking in a sink felt like a miracle. They talked about their lives, not in dramatic confessions, but in slow, honest exchanges. Daniel told her about his late son, about the birthdays he still marked in silence. Maya told him about her mother, who died when she was 14, about the way loneliness could stretch years into something shapeless and heavy. They didn't rush anything. They didn't name what was growing. But it grew all the same. One evening, Maya came home from work with her eyes red. "They cut my hours," she said quietly. "Too slow during the week." Daniel felt a familiar fear climb his ribs, the fear of not being enough. "We'll manage," he said. "You'll find something else too." She shook her head. "What if I don't? What if this all falls apart again?" He stepped closer, careful, respectful of the space she still needed. "It won't. Not because life is easy, but because you won't be alone this time." She searched his face. "You can't carry us forever." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I don't have to. Maybe we carry each other." Later that night, Maya stood in Lena's doorway, watching Daniel rock her to sleep. His movements were awkward but tender. The baby's tiny hand rested against his chest as if she knew where she belonged. For the first time, Maya allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't end in fear. The call came in the middle of winter. Daniel's sister had been in an accident. She'd survived, but the recovery would be long. Her 2 children, Daniel's niece and nephew, needed a place to stay. Daniel stared at his phone, torn. He barely knew how to say it out loud. Maya listened silently as he explained. Of course, she said when he finished. Bring them here. It meant tight space, tighter money, louder days. It meant chaos. It also meant family. The house filled with children's laughter, arguments, spilled cereal, and too many shoes at the door. Lena learned to crawl faster than anyone expected, chasing after bigger feet. Maya balanced 2 jobs now, diner mornings, cleaning offices at night. Daniel took overtime when he could. They were tired. They were also, somehow, happy. The proposal wasn't planned. It happened on a night when the power went out in a storm and they all sat in the living room lit by candles. The kids slept in tangled piles. Lena dozed against Maya's shoulder. Daniel looked at Maya and saw the woman who had once collapsed on cold concrete and somehow stood again. I don't want to pretend we're temporary anymore, he said softly. I don't want to wake up one day and realize I never asked you to stay. Her breath hitched. Daniel, I know this started in crisis, he continued. But it doesn't have to end there. I love you. And I love her. And whatever shape family takes for us, I want it to be forever. Tears slid down Maya's cheeks. She laughed through them, a sound born of disbelief and relief. Yes, she said. 1,000 times, yes. Lena stirred at the sound of their voices and let out a sleepy squawk. Daniel laughed. She approves. The wedding was small. No grand venue. No expensive dress. Just a borrowed hall, string lights, secondhand decorations, and more love than space. Maya walked down the aisle holding Lena. Daniel waited with trembling hands. When they spoke their vows, there was no promise of perfect days. Only a promise to keep choosing each other when the world grew heavy. Years later, Maya would sometimes think about that night at the bus station, the cold, the hunger, the darkness closing in on her vision. She would think about how close she had come to disappearing. And she would look at the life around her, the noisy kitchen, the children at the table, Daniel by the sink pretending not to sing while washing dishes, Lena racing down the hallway with unstoppable energy. She would understand then that family didn't always arrive the way stories promised. Sometimes, it arrived as a stranger in a gray coat who simply refused to walk away. And everything changed because of it.